for the management of chronic wasting disease. It's known as DMA 4, or Disease Management Area 4. We have plenty of folks here with many different areas of expertise to field your questions. Some of them will call up as speakers. I'll take the time now to introduce the folks we have here today. Starting here, many Game Commission staff here, some of which will step to the podium. Wayne LaRush is the Game Commission's Special Assistant for CWD Response. Dave Wolfgang is the Director of the Department of Agriculture's Bureau of Animal Health and Diagnostic Services. Brian Burhans is the Game Commission's Executive Director. John Klein has come out today. John is the Director of Government Affairs for the Pennsylvania Federation of Sportsmen's Clubs. We have Matthew Schnoop. Matthew is our new director, the Game Commission's new Director of Wildlife Management. Tom Grohall, Deputy Executive Director for the Game Commission. Chris Rosenberry. Chris is the Supervisor of the Game Commission's Deer and Elk Section. Justin Brown, he's the Game Commission's Veterinarian. Steve Smith is the Director of the Game Commission's Bureau of Information and Education. Bruce Metz is the Southeast Region Director for the Game Commission. Did I hit everybody? With that, I'll turn things over to Brian Burhans to talk about the CWD threat.
Just to kind of set the stage, you know, as we look back in time, we've had ecological disasters in this country, in North America, that has hit us. One, many of us has heard the great story of the American chestnut and how that ecological disaster transpired back in about 1910 here in Pennsylvania, wiped out an entire tree that was a very important tree for people and wildlife. Chronic wasting disease is another one of those diseases that is an ecological disaster. You know, the problem and difficulty with chronic wasting disease is the deer doesn't die overnight. You don't find deer out in the landscape. But nonetheless, those deer are dying. The white-tailed deer is very important to Pennsylvania. After all, it fuels a $1.6 billion hunting industry in the state of Pennsylvania. These are the dollars through license sales that the Pennsylvania Game Commission uses to manage all wildlife in the state of Pennsylvania. The necessity of another disease management area from CWD is devastating. This will impact the citizens in those areas. It will impact our hunters in those areas. And it's one more step along the way where this disease, this insidious disease, continues to expand. You know, there's some misconceptions about chronic wasting disease out there, unfortunately, but some things we know for sure. Chronic wasting disease will not just simply run its course or burn itself out. Chronic wasting disease, another fallacy is that, well, it was always here. Well, there's no evidence, not even any remote evidence to suggest that. We have CWD, and it is expanding. This is a serious and insidious disease that the Pennsylvania Game Commission is committed to do everything we can possibly do to deal with this disease. Similar to white nose syndrome and other diseases that we're dealing in this state, this is an issue that the Game Commission is working very hard with our partners, Department of Ag and other partners, to do everything we can to keep this from further spreading.
Thanks, Brian. We talk about DMA 4, and it's so named because it's the fourth one the Game Commission has established. Now, we have only 3 active DMAs in the state. DMA 1, which was the first established in 2012 after a captive deer was detected CWD positive in Adams County, was dissolved last year in 2017. We did enhanced testing within DMA 1 for 5 years, did not detect the disease within DMA 1, and dissolved the DMA. So all of the special rules that we'll get into talking about later went away there. Now, perhaps the day will come where DMA 4 sees a similar fate. You know, this one positive in a captive deer at this point. To sum up our DMAs, DMA2 followed closely the establishment of DMA1. It's what we generally term to be in south central Pennsylvania, although it's quite large now, and it spans west to east from Cambria County all the way into Adams County. Back in 2012, when it was established after 3 free-ranging deer were detected CWD positive, it was 900 square miles. Now it's more than 4,000 square miles. The reason it's been expanded was because of new positives being detected, either in captive deer or free-ranging deer. Until the middle of last year, it was the only DMA in PA that where we knew we had the disease among free-ranging deer. That changed when we detected CWD in DMA3 last year. DMA3 also established because of a CWD positive detected in a captive deer in 2014, again, detected among free-ranging deer in 2017, and since has been detected twice in free-ranging deer that were harvested by hunters in this past season. With all of those DMAs, there is the possibility for expansion of those DMAs due to new positives detected this year through the hunting seasons or roadkills that were picked up and tested positive. But again, we're awaiting the return of final test results from all of the samples taken from the hunter harvest this year, and we'll be working on those DMA expansions should they be necessary. Within DMAs, including DMA4, special rules apply. There's a prohibition on the feeding of deer within DMAs. The use of urine-based deer attractants is prohibited within DMAs. The field possession of urine-based deer attractants also is prohibited. And then the big one, there is a prohibition on the removal of high-risk deer parts from within the DMA to any spot outside the DMA. So when we talk about high-risk deer parts, simply put, that's the head and backbone. There is a more detailed list of specific parts that is available in the brochure up front, that is available on our website. It contains those parts that are contained within the head. But essentially, what a hunter needs to do when a hunter harvests a deer within a DMA and wants to transport it somewhere outside the DMA is to remove the head and backbone. Now, not all hunters will do their own processing. Those that do their own processing need to make plans in order to be sure that they are prepared to remove the head and backbone and properly dispose of the head and backbone within the DMA. For hunters who use deer processors for deer that they harvest, they need to find a processor that's within the DMA, and for those who are taking their deer to a taxidermist, same thing. They need to find a taxidermist within a DMA. Now, within our DMAs, we'll compile a list of cooperating processors and taxidermists. As far as DMA4 is concerned, we'll be making a list available on our website as we get closer to hunting season. For the other DMAs, they are available. When we talk about hunters who do their own processing needing to remove the head and backbone, we try to make things as easy as we can for them. We place out mostly on game lands, but in some other public areas, dumpsters that are used for the collection of high-risk deer parts. Last year, we had 2 separate receptacles that we used for the collection of high-risk parts. Essentially, one of the receptacles was for the collection of backbones and the other for heads. The reason that we separated them was we made available to hunters who harvested deer within DMAs free chronic wasting disease testing for the deer that they harvest. We were taking the heads that they deposited in bins, testing them for CWD, notifying them of the results when they return to us. We intend on continuing that within DMA4 this year, offering those tests that are free to the hunter and help us build our sample to an appropriate number. The DMA4 map is projected on the screen in front of you. A bit hard to see that gray shaded area that is the DMA. As with all of our DMAs, we use roads to define the boundary to make them more apparent on the landscape. If you look from west to east, in that northern part of the DMA, not the northern tip, but where the DMA is in the northern part, you can see the city of Lebanon at the western point. And then just beyond the DMA boundary on the eastern point is Reading, to give you some idea of the scope of the DMA. If you drop down to the southwestern corner of the DMA, that's the city of Lidditz. The DMA goes into both the cities of Lebanon and Lidditz. The DMA includes the boroughs of Adamstown, Denver, Ephrata, Monton, Richland, Womelsdorf, and Wyomissing. And it includes a number of state game lands, including state game lands 46, 220, 225, 274, and 425. Now, in addition to those special rules that apply within the DMA, there are some additional management measures that are put into place within the DMA. All known roadkill deer within a DMA are picked up and collected for disease testing. Now, it won't be the Game Commission doing the pickup there. We contract out that work, and it's my understanding that a contractor is not yet in place, but that's something that will begin very soon. I also want to point out, when we're talking about CWD sampling within our DMAs, that sampling is not limited only to DMAs. Sampling occurs statewide as part of our annual deer aging work. That's how the first free-ranging deer within DMA2 were detected, through this work. But sampling is increased within DMAs, and the collection of roadkills for sampling, the collection of hunter-harvested deer heads that are deposited in collection bins are among the ways that we increase the sample. Also, the sampling of suspected CWD positives that are suspected because of the behavior they're displaying. Also within DMAs, and this will be the case within DMA4, we employ our DMAP program. The DMAP program is the Deer Management Assistance Program. Many of you are familiar with it. It's a program through which hunters can obtain permits that are good for the harvest of antlerless deer during any established deer hunting season. In most areas of the state, DMAP is associated with a specific property, whether it be public or private. If you get a DMAP permit, it is good only for that specific property. Here within DMA4, as we followed the model put into place last year with DMA3, the entire DMA will be the DMAP unit. Any hunter with a DMAP permit for DMA4 can use it anywhere within the DMA. That's not to say that the permit allows you to trespass on another's property, as the case anywhere. Hunters need permission to hunt the property where they hunt, but they will be able to use these additional DMAP permits, should they obtain them, anywhere throughout the DMA. So that wraps things up as far as the DMA is concerned. With the CWD issue in general, and again, this is the fourth DMA that we've established, so we've tended to see this in places where we've put new DMAs into place. There's a general unfamiliarity with CWD, the disease. It's one of those issues that while we've had it for 5 years in Pennsylvania, it seems that most people will begin to pay attention to it when it's in their backyard. So when the disease emerges in a new area, as it has here within DMA4, we'll have a whole new audience that we need to bring up to speed, educating them on the disease and these special rules that apply within DMA. So I wanted to bring up Wayne LaRoche. Again, Wayne's our special assistant for CWD response, to speak generally on CWD.
CWD is not like most of the diseases that you're used to. It's not a bacteria or a virus. It's believed to be a misfolded protein, which makes it difficult because we have no pharmaceutical treatments. There's we have no vaccines. We have no pharmaceuticals that can actually help with the disease. It's always fatal. Any deer or elk that gets CWD, they all die. It takes 18 to 24 months usually to have clinical signs and for deer to begin dying. Some people don't see dead deer on the landscape, so they don't think CWD is a big problem. It's not like hemorrhagic disease where we have a lot of dead deer that show up, but it's always fatal. The deer die. So it's a difficult thing for us to deal with because really the only tools that we have to deal with it once it's out in a wild deer population is to try to kill animals, to remove them from the landscape, to remove them so that they don't continue to spread the infection. It spreads from animal to animal. Saliva, urine, feces, all have the infectious particles that get transported onto the landscape. And the bad thing about the landscape is that these prions can persist for at least 15 years. And so at a certain point in time, you can get environmental contamination that then is infectious back to the animals. So you can get infection both from animal to animal, ingestion of the prions, as well as from the environment. So it's a dangerous disease compared to other diseases because of some of these characteristics of the disease. Now, for you folks out there on the landscape, you can be really our front line of detection of this disease. Now, the deer will drool, they'll have the shakes, they'll appear to be emaciated, drooping ears, they'll lose coordination, fall down oftentimes. And so if you see sick-looking deer, we would like you to contact our regional offices or one of our game wardens so that we can come out and deal with it and have the animals tested. Many times, actually, with our testing in DMA2, we have a much higher incident of positive animals through the detection and reporting of people than we even do through the rest of our sampling. So it's really important that if you see a sick-looking deer, to report it to us. We also have concerns, and the CDC now advises that any sick deer should be, not placed into the food stream. We should not eat them. We'd advise that people should not eat any sick-looking deer or any deer, regardless of what the disease is. And we still have people that insist on eating deer that after we've tested them and told them they're positive. So we advise against that, going into the hunting seasons next year. If we come to you and tell you not to eat a positive deer, you shouldn't do it. So I'll be here. I'll be glad to answer any other questions. And just as a basic introduction, I think that's probably enough for now.
Thanks, Wayne. John Klein.
Thank you. My name is John Klein. I am Director of Government Affairs for the Pennsylvania Federation of Sportsmen. Just a couple quick comments. Obviously, sportsmen are alarmed, okay? Once again, chronic wasting disease. It's an ecological disaster we see coming, so we're very, very concerned. The Executive Director mentioned about the amount of money that the Game Commission has expended on fighting this disease, and I'll remind those of you that might not be aware, that money comes out of the game fund, okay? That's hunters' money, okay, that could otherwise be spent on other things, so we're very, very concerned about that. And along with that, we call on the Game Commission and the Department of Ag and the administration to put more resources into fighting this. This is a very, very big deal for us, and not just for people that hunt, but for all Pennsylvanians. These are wild animals, or at least they're supposed to be wild animals. And once again, there seems to be a continual correlation with commercial deer farms. So here we go again. So we call on Department of Ag to please do more, and if you need more resources, we advocate for that too. the threat is not just for hunters, it's also for a 1.4, sometimes argued $1.6 billion industry in Pennsylvania, and that's hunting, okay? This hits home for me, this map. I spent a good portion of my life living in western Berks County, and I can assure the Department of Ag and the Game Commission, we have a strong presence in there. We want to work with both departments to get the word out to sportsmen's clubs and to people in the general public. So, thank you.
Questions?
Really quickly, you talked about, for the other DMAs, for DMA 3, that there were disposal sites. Can rehash the plan for that to expand into DMA 4?
Sure. That be, DMA 4 will be much like DMA 3 in that there will be collection sites for the collection of high-risk parts. And we're planning to move forward with the free testing within DMA 4. So, oftentimes we'll establish these collection sites on state game lands. So in the parking lot of a state game lands, which will be on our website, marked on a map as a collection site, there will be a place where hunters who harvest deer can know to show up to dispose of the backbone and to also drop off the head of that deer for free CWD testing. So how many collection sites were in each of the DMAs last year? 26 total. So split among 2 DMAs last year, split between two DMAs. So now we'd be looking at something along the same lines there, I imagine. But we haven't gotten down to brass tacks on the number of dumpsters, the number of collection bins, or anything like that, but we do intend to offer free CWD testing there and offer this service as we have in other DMAs.
I know like 10 and 15 years ago, mad cow disease was like a huge thing, and I know John mentioned that, this is a big deal not just for hunters, but for Pennsylvanians. Should we brace ourselves for that kind of concern that people overseas felt after the mad cow broke out?
Who wants to answer that?
Again, there has been no case where a human has been diagnosed with chronic wasting disease or any knowledge of that. There are recent studies that, there's a recent monkey study that's caused some alarm and actually caused the CDC to change their website, their advisory about keeping CWD out of the food stream. So the concern is growing. Obviously, chronic wasting disease and mad cow disease are similar. These prion diseases do seem to have a history of leaping species barriers. So no, there's not anything imminent, but then there's plenty of reason for us to proceed with caution.
Is there any reason why hunters should avoid those DMAs and just go to unaffected areas, or are you still encouraging them to go to these areas and just follow the procedures?
We're encouraging them to go to those areas and follow the procedures. We're very concerned that if hunters stop hunting in these areas, that we won't be able to control the deer herds there, and that could actually cause the problem to become worse than it is now. So, even within our DMA2, the number of infected animals per 100 or per 1,000 still remains very, very low. And then couple that with our providing the opportunity for free testing through our drop boxes, then we're trying to do our best to provide assurances to the hunters that that they have a product that's safe for them.
Do you all see this continuing fight against this potentially raising license costs at some point, maybe in the future, if this continues to kind of expand?
It definitely is costing us more. We're estimating $1.5 to $2 million to $1.3 million this year for all of our costs. And every time we get a new disease management area, then we have to put into place, you know, all those activities, the roadkill contractors, all the various testing and everything that goes into that. So those costs keep going up. So the more it spreads, the more locations that we have, the more work we have to do, then that places our costs on an exponential increase, just as the disease we expect to increase exponentially in the state. And it has been. 2012, we had 3 cases. And then it has increased. Last year, we had 25 cases, which was cumulatively more than in the previous years. And already this year, we've got cumulatively more than what we had in all the previous years, and we don't have our testing done yet. So it's going up exponentially, and that means our costs will also go up exponentially.
One thing I'll add too to what Wayne said, there's a general recommendation for hunters everywhere to never eat a sick-looking animal. So if with CWD, not every CWD positive deer is going to show clinical signs of the disease, the drooping ears, the drooling that Wayne had described earlier. But certainly if such a deer is encountered or harvested, we would recommend not eating that animal. Then also the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention recommends hunters hunting within an area that is known to have CWD. Get their animal tested before consuming it, and we make that easy for hunters within our DMAs at present time with the free testing that we offer.
How is hunting been in other DMAs? Has it decreased?
Chris, do you have numbers on that? There's no evidence of any decrease. I think that we're all comfortable in saying that. Sure thing.
Just to clarify, because you asked a very important question about should hunters be concerned in DMA4. We got to be clear that right now we don't have any evidence that there's any disease in the wild deer. So we're taking these precautions to do the surveillance to make sure that we do, if it is out there, that we can detect it. But as was mentioned earlier, you know, nobody should eat a sick animal, no matter, you know, whatever it is, CWD or otherwise.
Any follow-ups?
The DMA 1 lasted 5 years.
Yes.
Let's say best case scenario, no other deer come up with this in DMA 4. 5 years of.
I don't think that it's written in policy anywhere to dissolve after 5 years, but I'm told 5 years. Any questions?
That's assuming any more positive. Every time there's a positive, it starts from that point again.
Okay, that looks like it'll do it. If any of the TV media seeks on-camera interviews with our staff, we'll be available here, and thank you for coming out. Yes.
Jim Lewis, right? Could you tell me a little bit about where the deer was found?
Well, we've been saying